Good morning. Thank you all for joining us here today. Just so that we can make sure everything is working properly with our technology, if you can hear us, can you please raise your hands or type yes in the chat? Wonderful. I see all of your hands raised, so we will go ahead and get started. So welcome, and thank you all again for joining us for today's Fall's Professional Use session. My name is Sarah Albertelli, and I'm the Hicks Honors College Graduate Assistant, assisting the Career Success Center for today's session. So this event is one of many offered by the Career Success Center, designed to assist students with preparing for their future careers. Throughout this entire week, there have been numerous sessions covering a variety of career-related topics. And today's Thursday, so we still have a couple of really great ones still on the list. To view these sessions that have been offered throughout the week, please visit our website, of which I've already provided in the chat box. So following this week's Professional U event, the Career Success Center, in conjunction with the Career Management Center, will be hosting the virtual Osprey Career Fair. This event will be held next Tuesday, October 6th from 3 to 6 p.m. via the Handshake Career Portal. For students who are interested in networking with employers on a smaller scale, please consider attending our virtual diversity mixer. That's going to be held the night prior to the career fair from 7 to 8 p.m., also via the Handshake Career Portal. For this session, we will be moderating both the Q&A and chat boxes for any questions that you all may have for our guest speaker. These questions will be brought up either throughout the presentation or at the very end. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Audra Morrison, the career counselor from the Career Success Center, who will be discussing career fair ready resumes. Thank you all.
Great, Sarah, thanks so much for that introduction. And thank you everyone for being here today. I do want to just give another brief little introduction and say that this presentation does have some interactive components of it. And during those interactive components, you can feel free to type your response in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and speak if you would like to answer verbally. Both of those options are fine. So as Sarah said, I do work at UNF in the College of Arts and Sciences Career Success Center, and I'm also employed as a remote resume writer for Monster.com. So I have a lot of experience with writing, reviewing, and editing resumes at all levels, whether that be undergraduate students, graduate students, or working professionals with 20+ years of experience. So I'm going to be sharing a couple of tips with you today to help you all make sure that your resumes are career fair ready or internship ready or full-time job ready, whatever stage you are at with your document. So let's see if we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So I do kind of want to gauge the room just to see who we have in the audience today. Would you guys mind just kind of typing in the chat to let me know what your class level is? Are any of you graduating soon? Are you seniors? Is this more of a sophomore, junior level class? And also if we have any freshmen in the room. Okay, so it looks like we have quite a mix. I see freshman, sophomore, senior. Okay, so we have definitely a solid mix. So there may be some of you in the room who are graduating soon, who kind of have your sights set on getting a job like that screen is showing right now. But for those of you who are freshmen, some of this content will also be important for you because you're probably starting to think about, you know, solidifying and identifying more with a specific major and starting to think, how will this major kind of coincide with the career I'm planning to get? And then of course, internships are typically something that are brought up along the way as well. So I'll make sure to kind of key in on some of the more entry-level resume writing tips, as well as some of the more senior level resume writing tips throughout the presentation. So as you guys can see on the screen, there's a big difference between just having a resume and having a good resume. Just by the two examples on the screen, you can see how different they look. All of the different formatting tactics. The one on the right-hand side looks like it may have even been handwritten. And if it wasn't handwritten, it has a very, very just non-traditional font that was used. You can see there's different doodles, there's a picture on it. So lots of different things going on with these two samples on the screen. And this is really just to make the point that it's so important to have your document reviewed by a second set of eyes, because Sometimes you may think that you have a good document or that you're writing your resume correctly, and you go and have it reviewed and you realize there's a lot of things that need to change, or just different formatting techniques that you can alter with your document. The best person to have your document reviewed by is definitely someone who works in a career services office or who works in a resume writing role, and even someone who has a background in human resources, because those people typically see a large plethora of resumes on a daily basis. But if you don't have access to any of those professionals, or maybe you just really don't have the time to meet with them and you're kind of going through a last minute job hunt, then even having a roommate or a friend or a family member review your document just to look for errors and to give you some suggestions is definitely better than not having anyone look at it at all. But as I said, going to your local career services office for whatever college you're in is definitely the best choice. Here at UNF, we actually have 6 different career centers. There's a career center specifically for freshmen, and then there's a career center for each college. So the College of Engineering has their own, College of Business, College of Education, College of Health, and then I work in the College of Arts and Sciences. So depending on what your major is, you would go to your respective career office to get that resume help. So now we're going to take a look at a sample that does have a lot of errors throughout it, very intentional errors. But I want to let you guys kind of take a look at this resume for a second and see what errors you can spot. Again, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to shout a couple out, but if not, feel free to just type them in the chat. And in just a moment here, I'll progress through the resume and I'll highlight some of the errors and kind of double check you guys and see what you've caught. But there's definitely numerous ones throughout the document. So let's see what you guys can find. And I'm just looking over at the chat box. Okay, someone says fancy font with the applicant's name. Yep, right there at the top. Definitely a font that's very hard to read. And it looks like the name is I Want to Be a Nurse, which is also kind of funny. It doesn't really seem like a real name. I think that's going to be one of our first ones. Anybody else have anything they want to add? That was a good first one. Okay, someone says starting off with education instead of relevant experience. You make a good point, but actually typically for student level resumes, for people who are currently enrolled in their degree, you actually do want to start with your education at the top. You don't move your education down below your experience until around 5 years after graduation. So let's kind of go through this. A lot of times this is one of the first things people catch is the inappropriate email address, sexymamatobe@yahoo.com. Definitely not an email that you want to be using on your resume. Even if that is your personal email, that's fine to use that in your personal life, but definitely not in your professional life and definitely not during your job search. We already talked about the font. You also don't ever want to put a picture on your resume. It's a big no-no in the job search industry and the resume writing world. The general consensus on the topic is no. However, you will see templates out there that do have a place for you to put a picture, and you may even hear personal preference from some recruiters who say that they like to see pictures on there. But one thing you have to remember with resumes is that there's a lot of gray areas and there's very few black and white rules. And so that's where you'll kind of get those varying opinions. But being a professional who writes in the industry according to the national standards, I'm here to tell you that putting a picture on a resume at the national standard level is still something that we advise against doing. Some of the other issues in the education section, the person has spelled the name of their degree wrong, and that's a very common error. Students will put an S on the word bachelor's, and it doesn't go there. Typically, you're receiving a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science degree, so there's no need to put the S on the end of the word bachelor's. Also, for those of you who are freshmen in the room, this is going to be an interesting point for you. Once your second semester of your freshman year ends, so basically when you're starting your sophomore year, essentially nothing from high school should be on your document anymore, because coming to college is the time to replace all of that content from high school with new fresh content from your college career. So if you're in your very first semester, you know, you haven't really had the chance to use the document yet, I understand your high school information is probably still on there, but just know that it's on its way out the door. And as soon as you reach that sophomore year, there should be nothing from high school on there unless it's directly related to the type of job you're applying for. So maybe you are going for a bachelor's degree in nursing, and in high school maybe you volunteered as some sort of hospital assistant. In that case, you would be able to leave that content on there. Someone else typed in the chat that they have inconsistent bolding throughout the document. So you can see with their category headers, education is bold, relevant experience is bold, but then we get down to employment history and that's not bolded. Then relevant experience is not capitalized, whereas the other ones are. Basically just a lot of formatting issues down the document. The content kind of zigzags down the page. They use multiple different types of bullets. They use arrows in one section, they use numbers in another section, then they use circular bullets at the bottom. So they're just really all over the place with their formatting. But one of the most important errors that this person made was putting this additional information section at the bottom of the page, where they overshared lots of very personal information that not only should you never put on your document, it's actually illegal for an employer to ask you some of these questions because they could make a hiring decision based on those, and that would be discrimination. So you never want to provide your social security number on your resume. You definitely don't need to be offering up your date of birth, and you certainly don't need to be telling anyone your marital status or how many children you have. So great job catching those. Someone else put in the chat that there's no objective statement. And we're actually going to get to that topic a little bit later in the presentation, but I'll kind of just say a little piece on that now. Objective statements are actually optional, so you're not required to put one on the document. They're very common on student resumes, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but just something to know, it's not a requirement, so if you leave it off, that is not considered wrong. So of course, most people know that the overall purpose of the resume is to introduce you to the employer for the position that you're applying to. So unless you're lucky enough to already know someone who works in the company, or have someone who recommended you to the job, oftentimes you don't know anyone within the company and they don't know anything about you. And all they do know is what you put on that resume. So if for some reason the information is inaccurate or isn't up to date or is misleading in any way, you're only hurting your chances of those people getting to know you as a professional as it relates to the job. So it's very important to have a good resume. It's very important to catch the reader's attention early, because they're ultimately trying to identify the best candidate for their position and secure an interview with that candidate. So the resume in the beginning phases is the most important piece of the application process, because that's what gets you the interview. That's what gets you in front of them to have that personal conversation. Once you get into the interview, that then becomes more important, because that's where you have the opportunity to make or break your chances. So I have another kind of quiz question for you all. I want to know how long you all think an employer spends looking at your resume when they're determining their initial interest in you as a candidate. So when they're deciding yes or no, how long do you think they spend reading your document? Okay, someone said 10 seconds. We'll see if we get any other guesses. Someone says, okay, 5 minutes, 1 minute. 1 minute if it's not, but no, the other. Okay, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, 2 minutes. Okay, so it seems like a general consensus for you guys is a couple of minutes. So some short amount of minutes, somewhere between 1 or 2, maybe 5 minutes if the resume is a lot longer. A couple people put 30 seconds. They are the closest. Typically, an employer will review your resume for less than 15 seconds. It's typically called the 6-second scan, which I know sounds very fast, but I'm here to tell you that that statistic is 100% true. I can say this from my own self, being in a hiring position where I hire student workers, and sometimes I sit on panels to hire full-time staff members. And when you're initially looking at the document, it's very, very brief. But once you determine that it's a yes, and that you like the candidate, you want to offer them an interview, you look at the document in much more detail. You spend a lot more time reading it, going through their specific experience. But when you're first glancing at the document, the reason the time limit is so short is typically the employer knows exactly what they're looking for. So to give you an example, if I was hiring for a position within my office at UNF, and we were looking for a second career counselor, there's a requirement that you have to have a master's degree in counseling to work in our office in that position. So if I get 100 applicants who all send me their resume, it only takes me 2 seconds to open up a document and go right to the education section and see, does this person have a master's degree in counseling, yes or no? And if it's a no, I immediately move on to the next one, because it's a hard requirement for our office, and it wouldn't take me more than 2 seconds to see, oh, this person has a bachelor's degree in biology, they're not qualified, and then you would move on from there. I wouldn't even spend time reading any other parts of the resume because I know that they're not going to be a candidate for my job. So it's typically why it's so short, but just know that every company is different and every person is different. So there's some people who really love reading resumes who do spend a lot more time on them. I actually talked to someone 2 weeks ago who told me that when a document is longer than 1 page, so let's just say, for instance, it's 2 pages, they actually start reading it on the back. They don't read the front first, they'll read the back first and just see what they like on the back side of the document, which is an interesting technique. I've personally never done that, but it just goes to show you that everyone kind of has their own method for how they go through resumes. But when you're dealing with a large stack and you have hundreds of applicants, people don't have time to read through every word and every line on the document. So it's typically a quick scan and just kind of reading whatever's bolded, whatever's popping out at you to get a general idea of the candidate. So if you guys only take away 3 points from this presentation today, the 3 things I want you to remember when it comes to your resume format is that it needs to be clear, consistent, and concise. It's kind of the 3 C's of resume writing. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on what each of those C's kind of stands for. So with clarity, it should be very obvious what your resume goal is, what it's targeted to, or what industry you're applying for. So that's what I mean when I say clear. I should be able to read the very top of your resume for 2 seconds and know exactly what kind of role you're seeking. And if I can't tell, then that's going to be an issue for you. That's something you're going to want to change. As we talked about earlier, objective statements aren't required, but they do offer a really good opportunity to target your resume to an industry if you don't have other experience that can target your resume through your experience. So I'll show you an example. This is more of a professional summary and less of a student objective. A lot of times student objectives will say something like, seeking internship in criminal justice industry using my knowledge of local and community services in Jacksonville. It'll usually be something really short. What I do recommend for those of you in the room who may be freshmen or sophomores kind of earlier in your career, if you're going to do a simple objective statement like seeking internship in communication industry, try to add something personal, something about yourself, something about your skills that you have to offer. Because if all you say is, hey, I'm seeking this job or internship, you're not really telling the employer why they should hire you. You're kind of just saying, hey, I need a job. So you want to give a little bit more, and that's kind of what this objective or summary on this example is showing. So they're saying that they're a detail-driven professional. They have a wide variety of marketing platform and strategy knowledge. They possess a strong background in communication, advertising, and account management. So it's really strong. It's telling the reader what they have to offer, what industries they have expertise in. And if they wanted to, they could add a third line to that and say, seeking an internship in communication field for an advertising position. Then the next thing I see is their education section, and I see that they have a Bachelor of Arts in Communication with a minor in advertising and marketing. So it's very obvious when I just read the very first few lines of this resume, it's obvious to me what industry the person is interested in, what their education is in, and what skills they have to offer. And that's exactly how it should be when you open up someone's resume. And so I said earlier that I should be able to tell what industry you're applying to based on your experience. But I do understand that oftentimes students, your experience is usually in customer service related roles. So you guys are bartenders, you're servers, you're sales associates, and that's okay. We're going to talk a lot more about that experience later. But if you don't have relevant experience from working in your industry already, that's when I would suggest using this objective statement. But if you do already have experience working in your industry, you may not have to use it if you don't want to, but you still can. That's why it's optional. It's kind of up to you. Your resume should be all about relevance. If you have relevant experience in the industry, obviously you're going to want to emphasize that content. You're going to want to put it right close to the top, cluster it with all of that other keyword information that we just talked about. But maybe you don't have experience that's directly related. And if that's the case, you want to try to highlight your transferable skills. Maybe right now you're working as a waiter or waitress, but you're interested in going into a role for a public relations company. You can emphasize your skill of being able to communicate with the public. That's what public relations is all about. When you're being a server or a waitress, you're talking to customers every single day, hundreds of people on a daily basis. So that skill of interpersonal communication is relevant to both industries. And so you'd want to highlight that on your resume. Sometimes it even comes down to personality traits. If those are going to be a good fit for the industry or the company, you can highlight those personality traits as well. Those might be things like organization, time management, more so just kind of personal characteristics rather than specific tangible skill sets. So a lot of students kind of get hung up on what they should include on their resume. What is considered relevant? But the answer is that anything that shows that you meet the qualifications is considered relevant. It does not have to be paid experience. So I'll give you one great example that a lot of students overlook all the time. So working with lots of psychology students, because I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences, a lot of times I get people who are really interested in being counselors or working in the community, or they really have a passion for working with children. And so sometimes I'll get students who, maybe they want to go for an internship with DCF or, some other company where they're working with juveniles or working with at-risk children. And they're trying to write their resume and they're trying to think, I don't have any experience that relates to that. And it turns out that most of those students have been babysitters or camp counselors in the past, and they didn't think that that experience counted. But they're in role as a babysitter and a camp counselor, you're in a role where you're directly interacting with youth and children on a daily basis. So that is extremely relevant. It should definitely be included on your resume, especially if you're going for a job in a position where you're going to be dealing with children in childcare. For someone else, maybe who has a babysitting background, but they're interested in going into, an industry where that's more technology focused, dealing with computers, that experience is going to be less relevant for that person because it doesn't exactly relate to what they're going for. So it's all about relevance to the job that you're seeking, which is why most people typically have more than one resume that they highlight different experience on for different jobs that they're applying to. So some things to consider putting on your resume would be courses, coursework, and projects. This is another one that gets overlooked. And when I say projects, I'm talking about any assignment that you do within your class that you're having to go out and actually do something, where it's more than just reading and writing a paper. Maybe you have to interview people in the community. Maybe you have to do a research paper or whatever the assignment may be. Something that shows you putting your specific skills to the test is a really good thing to highlight on your resume. Also, volunteer work. Even if you only volunteer once a month or once a year, if you do it over the summers, that's totally fine, to show that you're involved in the community and you're balancing pretty much anything that you're balancing in addition to your schoolwork looks good on a resume. So you'll want to include that. Internships, both paid and unpaid. Student activities and involvement on campus are another really, really great thing to include on a resume. Some of the best student resumes I've ever seen have actually been of students who were extremely involved on campus through clubs and student government, and their resumes looked like a true professional resume with lots of experience managing budgets, managing staff, planning events, and it was because they were a leader of a club on campus. So really great place to get involved. And also doing any undergraduate research with your professors is another really good experience to highlight on your resume. So a lot of people don't know that there are actually different types of resumes, which we're not going to go into too much detail on the different types, but I just wanted to at least inform you all of some of the popular types of resumes, just to kind of assist you depending on which career path you're going for. So chronological resumes are typically the ones that most people have heard of. They're kind of the most old school type of resume, and basically that type is going to just be a list of every single job you've ever held, all the way back as far as it goes. That's why it's called chronological. It's just based on time. The next type that we're looking at on the screen is going to be a functional or skills-based format. So this one kind of does the opposite of the chronological. It actually de-emphasizes your employment history and instead it emphasizes your skills that you have closer to the top of the page, and then your employment will be really small at the bottom of the page. That format is usually best for someone who's a career changer, who's going from one industry to a totally different industry, and they don't want to highlight where they've worked or where they've been employed. Instead, they're trying to highlight those transferable skills we talked about. A combination format, as the name implies, kind of combines both of those first two. So you have the employment, you also have the skills all in one document. The federal format is a document that's really common in criminal justice industries. So if there's any CJ majors in the room, for those of you who may be interested in federal or government jobs, those type of jobs require a federal resume, which is totally different than a civilian resume. Has a lot of nuances, a lot of extra information that they require. But again, that's only for federal government jobs. And then a CV is probably one of the most misunderstood documents, because a lot of people use the term CV and resume interchangeably as if they're the exact same thing, and they're not. They're totally different. The content on them is very similar. What makes a CV and a resume different is the industries in which they're used. So kind of similar to how the federal resume is used in the federal industries, CVs are used in research industry. So that's going to be any sort of graduate school, master's programs, any sort of program where you're doing research, which is typically related to grad school and higher education, and then medical industries as well. Those are kind of the only places where people use CVs in the true form of the document. Now, you might be applying to a job at the town center, working at the Sunglass Hut or something like that, and they may say, hey, send over your CV. If someone says that to you for a customer service job, they really mean resume. They're just uninformed and they don't realize that there's a difference between the two. So it's common to hear them used interchangeably, but just know that they are actually different. We're going to take a brief look at a few examples. And I've already described to you kind of what these are, so we'll just kind of go quickly through them. So this is an example of the chronological. You can see that right there at the top, the person has a pretty weak objective statement, seeking a part-time position. It really doesn't tell me anything at all. And because I'm opening up your resume on your application to my part-time position, I know you're applying to a part-time position, so it's really adding nothing to the document. And if you're gonna put something like that, I would just recommend leaving it off altogether. But then you can see as it goes into the work experience, all of the experience is listed in the same category, and it just kind of goes in reverse chronological order. There's no rhyme or reason to it. You can't really get a good idea of what this person wants to do with their career, because if you notice, they have a bachelor's degree in anthropology, which is a pretty broad major. And then their experience is cashiers at Publix. They've been an accounting tutor. They've been a student assistant for the College of Business, and they've worked sales. So from their work experience, you would think that this person was interested in business because of the accounting tutor and working for the College of Business, but then they have this anthropology major. So it's a little confusing. You don't know exactly what this person wants to do. So for this student, I would definitely recommend making some changes. And that's one of the flaws of the chronological resume. It's just typically not a good representation of targeting yourself to the industry. But you notice the person still used a very consistent layout. Everything is very straight down the page. It's very obvious where one section ends and the next section starts because of the bolded category headers. So it's not a bad resume. There's nothing that's wrong about it. It's more so just not really the best format, and it's not serving the candidate well. So now we'll take a look at a functional skills-based resume that's emphasizing the transferable skills right at the top. And this is actually a variation of my own resume. As I said earlier, most people have numerous versions. Personally, I probably have at least 20 different versions of my resume just because I use myself as an example a lot for class presentations. You can see at the time this one was written, I had my education section right there at the top. And then I went right into my areas of expertise, which for this document, I decided I wanted to emphasize program and event planning, document writing and critique, career counseling and coaching, marketing and communication, and teaching and presenting. So a really broad variety of skills that were highlighted and then I went ahead and went into additional detail about those. But you can see right below that I also did go into my career history right after that. And again, notice the consistent layout. All of my dates align. They're in a straight line. They're not zigzagging down the page. Mine are adjusted all the way to the right margin. And then my content on the left is all in a straight line adjusted to the left margin. So it's all very organized. Now we'll take a look at a combination format. This is actually an example that was inspired by a student that I worked with here at UNF, who this student just had a really great resume, and they really had no related work experience at all to the industry that they were in. They'd been a bagger at Publix, as you can see, but they still had 75 to 80% of their document filled with relevant content that was extremely related to their industry. You can see this student chose to use a much briefer objective statement, talking about seeking an opportunity to use their analytical, detail-oriented, and problem-solving skills in a big data environment. So right there, we know exactly what kind of industry the student is applying for. Then they tell you that they're skilled in simple and multiple linear regression, analysis of various, data analysis, and project efficiency. Lots of technical terms that I personally really don't know what they are, but someone who's in their industry would know those terms, and they would see those keywords right there at the top. Then the student went into their education section, highlighted that they had that bachelor's degree in statistics, highlighted their extremely awesome GPA that they had, and then they went into detail about the programs that they were proficient in and the academic projects that they had done. So really great example of a student resume. Also really good use of the combination format, because although it appears to be a bit more skills-based, since there's not a lot of employment on there, in this case, the student just didn't have any other employment to list. Another thing the student did really well was they made sure to fill the entire document. And of course, this is a screenshot, so it cuts a little bit off. But for those of you in the room who may be freshmen or sophomore, something else that's really important to take away is you never want your document to be less than 1 page. So you don't want to have a resume that's only half a page or 3/4 of a page. By that same token, if your document is longer than 1 page, you never want it to be 1.5 pages or 1 3/4. You want exactly 1 page or exactly 2 pages. Those are the only 2 options. And a resume should never ever be longer than 2 pages. If it is longer than that, it's probably a CV or a federal resume, because those are inherently longer. But for a normal civilian resume, your document should never go over 2 pages. So the most common format, as we've kind of discussed already, is the combination format. But regardless of which format you decide to use, you just want to make sure that you're communicating your most important information in the first 2 seconds. So as soon as someone opens your document, you want the very first things they see to be relevant and to catch their attention right away. So I get asked this question a lot by students as to whether or not they should use resume templates. And I'll say that just from working with students for so long now, I've reviewed well over 1,000 resumes. And I'd say a large majority, I would say at least a strong 50% of the student resumes I see are in templates. And without going into too much detail, because I could give a whole presentation on why you shouldn't use a template, the answer is definitely no. And I'll give you 2 main reasons why, because a lot of times people are surprised or they just really don't understand, because templates seem to be so easy. All you do is plug in your information. They're so great. Why should I not use one? Reason number 1 is that templates can be extremely hard to edit. So if your content does not fit well in the specific parameters that the template gives you, sometimes you can't really change that. So you're left with a lot of odd white space, big gaps, really short text that's really long, and it just ends up being really ugly and not visually appealing. And again, that's if your content doesn't fit well. Reason number 2 is that 95 to 99% of companies nowadays are using these things called ATS, or applicant tracking software systems, to read their resumes. So instead of it being a real human who's reading your paper document or your electronic document, it's actually a computer program that has been programmed to scan the document for certain words. And if it has the right type of words or the right number of words, it will make it through. And if it doesn't, the document gets rejected from the system. The catch with all of that is, if you use a resume template, it is highly likely that the ATS program won't be able to read it because of the formatting techniques that are used with templates. The ATSs simply aren't advanced enough to read the document. So it can become a huge error for people who are applying to big companies who are using ATS systems, because their document never gets through. And then, they've applied to 15, 20 jobs, they keep getting rejected and they don't understand why, and then they come to me and it turns out they used a template. So there's a lot more reasons, but as I said, I'll keep it basic for this class. Main takeaway point is, if you find a template you like, just recreate it yourself in Microsoft Word. It's very easy to kind of enhance your format and make your document pretty using Microsoft Word, using colors or other highlighting techniques without using a pre-made template. So we talked a lot about consistency already, because we're going back to those 3 C's of clear, consistent, and concise. Consistency was all with the formatting that we just discussed. Now we're talking about your document being concise. So concise basically means 1 page. In addition to that, it means no long sections. So there's a rule in resume writing called the dollar bill rule. And if you can hold up a dollar bill or a sticky note, which is a similar width to a dollar bill, and if you can hold this up and you can cover a section of text and there's still text popping out behind it, that means it's too long. Typically 3 lines maximum for anything that you're writing. So if it's your objective statement or your professional summary, 3 to 5, but when you start getting to 5 lines, you're getting into paragraph territory, and that's when people stop reading. When they see a large, bulky section of text, they just don't want to read it. They're looking for something short that they can read quickly. So you want to be concise with the length of your document, but also the length of your paragraphs, basically. Maintaining a consistent layout, which we've talked about. Using highlight features. So that's going to be things like bold, italics, underline, caps lock, and color. I highly recommend using these. It's definitely a yes, but you have to use them efficiently and you have to use them effectively. So if you bold everything on the document, nothing's going to pop out because everything's going to be bold. It's all going to be the same. Also, if you bold your title, your company, and your dates, nothing is popping off. It's just too much bolding. So you have to be strategic with how you use these highlighting features, but they can definitely enhance the document. They can definitely make it easier to read. So I would recommend using them. I also highly recommend using bullets as opposed to using like a paragraph format for the same reason I mentioned before. Bullets are inherently shorter for most of the time, and people are just more likely to read them than if they see that large section of text. Now, when it comes to bullets, as I said before, it's usually 5 maximum. I've seen people who do 10 or 15 bullets under a job description, and their bullets have like 2 words. Like they might have a bullet that says Microsoft Office, and it's just not an effective use of the bullet. Any bullets that are short should be combined together to make a longer bullet that's about 1 full line long, and at the longest 2 lines. So you shouldn't have a large number of short bullets. You should have a small amount of longer bullets instead. For your font size and style, it's most common to use an 11-point font size, but for some people, you may have less information. So you're going to want to use a little bit of a larger. In that case, you could use a 12. For people who may be more non-traditional, maybe you're a senior, you have a lot of work experience, and you have a lot of content to fit on 1 page, you can use a 10-point font. I don't recommend going any smaller than a 10 because at that point, it gets hard to read. You just want to make sure that you use the same font size for all of your body text. And then those headers for each category can be 1 size larger, just so they pop out and that the different categories are very clear and distinct. Another tip is to be very intentional with those category titles. I just kind of wanted to have this slide in here to show you guys that you do have a lot of flexibility with what you call stuff. Some categories it's hard to be creative with. For example, education, you're really not going to call that anything other than education. But when it comes to your work experience, you can break that up into different categories. You can have a category for relevant experience and other experience. You can have a category that's more specific, like it was called counseling experience. So you can be specific with your category headers, and I actually recommend the more specific, the better, because it just helps with targeting that document towards the industry. Some more tips are including categories that best support the resume goal, which we just discussed. Make sure you're displaying your current and up-to-date contact information as well as an appropriate email address. For your employers and your universities that you've attended, you don't need to include the full address. You just need to tell us what city and state those jobs were taking place in. For your education section, please indicate your expected graduation. Even if you're a freshman, don't write freshman, tell us expected graduation, because that information is more useful to us. Another tip that's not on this bulleted list is to measure time in terms of months and years, or just years only. For the most part, as employers, what we're typically interested in is how many years of experience you have with something, so the months are kind of just extraneous to us, but it's common to list them. What I would not recommend is using semesters as a term of measurement, because outside of being a student or working in the education field, no one else measures time in semesters, and so it's more confusing to them to see spring of 2020 than to just see December to May. So make sure you use months instead of semesters, and make sure you do include a date range for each employment and each opportunity that's on the resume. Even if it's volunteering, I need to know when you did it and how long you did it for. Avoid any irrelevant or extraneous content. As far as employment goes, anything that's longer than 10 years ago doesn't need to be included. And the same thing for any jobs that may not support the resume goal. So maybe you've held, 5 different customer service jobs, but one of them was only for a month. You don't have to include that if you don't want to, because you still have 4 other jobs that you can include, and hopefully they were for longer than 1 month. A lot of times students get overwhelmed by the idea that they should personalize their resume for every single job, but it really is true that you should do that. And that's only if you're applying for jobs in different industries. So if you're applying for 5 jobs that are all in the same industry, your content's going to be very similar because all the jobs are in a similar industry. But if you're applying for 1 job that's a customer service position at a sales company, and then you're going over here and applying for a job in a totally different industry, maybe as an engineering intern, your engineering intern resume is going to need to look a lot different than your customer service job at Chick-fil-A, because very different skills should be emphasized, and your engineering one should be a lot more focused on your relevant knowledge to that industry. So when you're targeting your resume, the basic things to do are to just list those categories in priority order, to place your relevant experience near the top and less relevant work experience closer to the bottom. Use industry-specific keywords. Students who don't know what keywords are, I'll let you in on a little secret. Keywords are simply just the words from the job posting. So anything that's a verb or a noun that's related to the job title itself is going to be a keyword for the ATS systems and for the person who's reading the document. So if you're applying for a career counselor position, I'm going to be looking for words such as career, counseling, etc. on your document. Talking about language, with your bullet points or your content, whatever format you choose to use for those, you want to make sure that you're not using full sentences. There shouldn't be any personal pronouns on your resume. Personal pronouns are words like I, me, and my. So instead of having full sentences, you should have sentence fragments that start with action verbs. So instead of saying something like, I supervised 5 staff members, you would say supervised 5 staff members. You want to incorporate as many accomplishments as you can. Anything that's numerical data is also good content to include, as well as anything that's highlighting a skill used rather than a task completed. So skills over task, and we'll look at some examples. So this one says, while working at Target, I supervised 5 other workers. Basically the same example I just gave. It has the personal pronouns. It's not really a great example of what you were doing. Instead, you could say supervised 5 team members and monitored safety and efficiency. So you're telling me what you were supervising them on, and that was their safety and efficiency. Another one, answered the phones and filed the papers. That is a very task-oriented bullet point. It doesn't really tell me anything about you or what you were doing at work. It's telling me what the duties of the job description were. Instead, you could say that as a worker, you delivered effective customer service while completing your administrative task. So you're flipping it to a skill that's more oriented towards you rather than highlighting that task. Some common errors that I see on resumes are going to be including high school content, which we already talked about that. If you're a sophomore and your jobs in high school aren't relevant to what you're applying for now, none of that should be on there. Make sure you include your current UNF degree, even if you haven't graduated yet. That's a really, really common error. Sometimes people will add their major, but they won't add their degree. So if you're a psych major, you have a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. You also want to include an expected graduation date, which we talked about. Place your education at the top of the page if you're currently enrolled, and do not use full sentences. Some other common errors and things that you shouldn't do is have an inappropriate email address. We don't need to see full addresses. We don't need to see personal information. We also don't need to see references. That's another really common error. References do not belong on a resume. I repeat, references do not belong on a resume. You also want to avoid any errors or typos, inconsistent bullets like we saw in the example this morning. You don't want to use resume templates, and you want to avoid those personal pronouns. So for those of you in the room who are thinking about jobs and internships, I would highly recommend that you guys check out the Osprey Career Fair, which is next week. Because of coronavirus, this is a virtual event this year, but there will be around 50 companies who are going to be there recruiting for positions that they're currently hiring for. So that may be full-time jobs or internships, just depends on the company. And this fair is taking place via Handshake, which is UNF's career platform that you can access through your MyWings account. That is all I have as far as content goes for our presentation, but we do have about 4 minutes for questions. So if anyone has any questions about the presentation, questions about me, questions about resumes, I am happy to answer any of those in the Q&A section, the chat section, or verbally. So please let me know. I'll give everyone a second to type, just in case you're typing up a question. And if not, we will end a little bit early. And I'm happy to answer anything. All right, looks like someone may have raised their hand. And I also have a question in the chat or in the Q&A section. Someone asked, if you've already submitted a resume to a company and it gets denied, can you resend a better version of it? The answer to this is yes, you can always reapply to a company. But kind of the second half of this answer is that you won't know why your resume got denied. You're not going to get some message saying, hey, sorry, your resume didn't make it through the ATS system. You'll just get a standard message, we're sorry you were not selected for an interview, other candidates were selected, or something like that. So you may not know why you got rejected, and so you may not want to resubmit immediately. I mean, that'll kind of be your personal decision. But yes, you can always reapply to a company. And you can also apply to multiple positions within a company as well. Good question. I saw someone had a hand raised earlier, but then it looked like it went away. So if you need to talk, you can raise your hand again and I'll click on you. Any other questions about resumes? All right, well, it looks like that's all we have for now. So I think Sarah has some closing remarks that she is going to make, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. I'd like to give a special thanks to Audra Morrison for taking the time to come speak with us today. And a big thanks to you all for being our attendees for today's session. You should all receive an email with a session survey link included. So we would greatly appreciate your feedback and your completion of that survey. Please be sure to check out our other professional use sessions. We have some really excellent sessions planned for the rest of the week. So thank you all again for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.